Good afternoon, and welcome to our first Arts and Entertainment Lecture Series of 2024. Today, we will be talking with Dr. Sam Adler. Sam Adler, to many, needs no introduction. A composer, scholar, educator, and dear friend. Dr. Samuel Adler is one of the greatest living composers and conductors of our time. A legendary risk taker with over 400 published works. He taught for 63 years, including at Juilliard and the Eastman School of Music, and has given master classes and workshops at over 300 universities worldwide. His recent album, sung by Arts Empowering Life's Choir, Gloria Dei Cantores, won the Ernest E. Bacon American Prize. And Sam has received numerous awards, including ASCAP's Aaron Copland Lifetime Achievement Award. Sam, like all great musicians, is a storyteller. Whether in conversation or in music, Sam truly has a gift that captures the attention of all that have encountered his personality and his music. But not only is he a storyteller, but he's a bridge builder, Jew and Gentile, Germans, Americans, young and old, Baroque and modern music enthusiasts. Sam can find the ability to ingratiate himself into the fabric of the lives of all that he encounters. To everyone listening to today's live show, there will be a question and answer segment at the end. And throughout today's talk, you can participate by entering your questions into the comments section of the platform that you're watching. And I will try to field as many as time might allow. Now, Sam, welcome and thank you. As you yourself have, Sam, you've said, building bridges with music seems to have been part of your destiny. Share with us how that started.
It certainly is, and I appreciate your very, very kind words. I hope that everybody is safe and warm since we're living through very, very cold weather all over this part of the United States anyway, and I know also where you are.
Yeah.
I'd like to start at the beginning. I was born in Mannheim, Germany, which is in southwestern Germany on the Rhine and the Neckar rivers. I was born in 1928. My sister Marianne was born in 1930, also in Mannheim. And the mother side of the family, my mother was born in 1900 in Mannheim, and her mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother were also born there. So we're a real Mannheim family on one side. My father came to Mannheim in 1921, and he came in a long way. That is, he was in the German army from 1914 to 1918. Before that, for 2 years, he had a pulpit. He was a cantor. He had a pulpit in a very small town in the Palatinate. And after the army, he enrolled in the University of Cologne and got a degree, a master's degree in music, in composition, and in piano. He was a wonderful pianist. At any rate, he came to Mannheim in 1921 as second cantor of the main synagogue called the Hauptsynagoge, which was the liberal synagogue. It had seats for 1,500 people, and it was a very, very large building and a very large synagogue. He was the second cantor of 5 cantors and 4 rabbis. So it was quite a congregation. He came there just having graduated from the University in Cologne, was full of music and new ideas. And he came there, and the music was 19th century. And he looked at it. He loved the melodies, which he already knew because they were mostly traditional. But the harmony was, a sort of Mendelssohnian, but not as good. So, being a very rebellious young man, he started to change the harmony of all the things. Well, the congregation, being used to singing to a certain harmony, didn't like it. All of a sudden, it sounded very strange. They went to the board and complained. So the board called him in after 1 year and said, Cantor, look, leave the music alone. It came from Sinai all the way to Mannheim, and we love it, and you're going to leave it. Who are you to change what came all the way from there he is,
Yeah.
making the prayer over the wine. And so they said, look, if you change one more thing, we're going to cease your being the cantor here, and you'll have to leave. Well,
You
he
know,
did.
it seems, Sam, you probably inherited a little bit of that rebellious
A
streak.
little bit, yes, I admit it. But he did something very smart. He married my mother.
Uh,
Not only was she a very beautiful young woman, but her father was a member of the board. So you don't kick out your future son-in-law's uh, person from the synagogue when he was going to marry your daughter. Well, he did marry her, and it was a very successful marriage. He married her in 1924, um, and she gave him some very good advice. He said, look, if you want to write synagogue music, write your own. Write things that come from you rather than through somebody else. And he followed her advice. Not only did he write synagogue music, but he also wrote an oratorio called Light and People. It was translated into English when we came to America, and it was called Bearers of Light. It was actually the story of Hanukkah, the lasting of one cruise of oil for a whole week instead of for 1 day, 8 days instead of 1 day. Well, it was a tremendous success. It was done by the local orchestra, large chorus, children's chorus, and narrator. Tremendous success, was done all over Germany. And all of a sudden, the board said, oh, we have something here. We can't fire him. So he was set. And in I believe it was 31, the first cantor, who was really very good, went to England. He sort of smelled what was coming and went to England and became cantor in Manchester. My father became first cantor. So now they had only 4 cantors. That was enough.
yeah.
At any rate,
So 31, you would have been just 3, and your sister was 1 year old.
that's right.
And obviously things were percolating there politically in Germany.
Well, politically, it was a terrible situation. My father was an ardent social democrat, and he was hoping that the social democrats would stay in power, but of course they didn't. And with all the turmoil going on, 33 happened. And we all know what happened then. Both Mr. Hitler became chancellor, and Mr. Roosevelt became president of the United States, all on the same day, my birthday, the 4th of March, 1933. Well, I went to school. I was the first class that was segregated. Only Jewish children could go to the Jewish school, and no Jew could go to the regular school. And that actually was a very good thing for us, because the teachers were all university professors who had been fired from their jobs and were now teaching first, second, and third grade. And for instance, my math teacher was at the University of Heidelberg, the head of the math department. And so you can imagine we had terrific instruction at our school. And so I went to first grade in 1934. And then my father actually was hopeful that we could stay. For instance, in 1936, we have a letter that he exchanged with Martin Buber, the famous philosopher. They were very close friends. And he wrote to Martin Buber, maybe we shouldn't be so quick in emigrating, because Martin Buber was going to Palestine that year. Maybe we should hold out, because I think these people are not going to last. Well, of course, he was wrong. And he waited for a long time. Not until the summer of 1938 did my family ask to have a visa for the United States. Now, here's where the lucky part came in. We, of course, my father was brought up in Hamburg, but he was born in Antwerp, because my grandfather, for 2 or 3 years, was a guest cantor at the congregation in Antwerp. For American purposes, we were Belgian citizens. So when we put in for our visa, it came back number 35, 6, 7, and 8. While my grandparents put in for the same day, and of course, they were all born in Germany, and they were 40,000 plus.
Wow. Hey, Sam, I have a picture of your family that I'd love everybody to see so they can imagine what it was like there. Here you go.
Well, this was a lovely time. Yeah. My mother took my sister Marianne and myself to Herrenalb, which was the only place Jews could go on vacation. Everything else was cut out. And here's my mother, my sister, and myself looking at some kind of a water.
Yeah.
It was, as a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, some friends of ours and Emily and I went to see Herrenalb, and it's still a very beautiful place. Yeah. And this is where we spent the vacation of actually 38. Now, go ahead.
There's one more I just have to show before we get too far, because there's a young Sam Adler with the violin. There you go.
There, these are the front steps of our house in Mannheim, and I'm playing the violin. I think at that time I was either 7 or 8. Yeah. I started when I was 7, and this was quite at the beginning. My right arm is a little stiff, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. Anyway, I just thought that our audience would appreciate sort of visualizing.
Well, the violin became my instrument. And as a matter of fact, when I went to college, I majored in violin as an undergraduate. Then I was seduced by composition and switched majors. At any rate, that's a little later.
Yeah.
Now, my father was very clever, because he did not want to look at any of my compositions, because when I was 7 or 8, I was writing songs, and I made my sister sing them all the time. And she is still a very good singer, and she did her best. I sometimes got very mad at her for not singing the right notes, but that's okay. We've made up many times since.
That's awesome.
At any rate, we did want to come to America, and we put into the American consulate and also to the German authorities, because Jews did not have passports. So now comes November 1938. November 9th to 10th was Kristallnacht, when the Nazis went into Jewish homes and destroyed 580 or some such synagogues in Germany, and it was a horrendous time. We were all scared to death. And on that day, we were supposed to get our passports. So my mother went to the passport office, and there was a man with a mustache. We called him Schnoss, because Schnurrbart means mustache. And he could be had. So she went, she said, I am supposed to pick up my passport. He said, here it is, 2,500 marks. So she had to pay. So she said, what about my husband? Said, he has to pay another 5,000 marks. And he has to come and pick it up himself. Well, that was difficult because my father knew that the Nazis were picking up Jews and putting them into concentration camps that day. So he went, and my grandfather happily had the money and lent it to us. And he got his passport and said to my mother, I'm going to go to Holland. We had an uncle there. I'm going to go there and escape so they don't take me to Dachau or someplace. Well, that was stupid because he got on the train, and at the border, everybody that had a J in the passport, because every Jew had to have a J in the passport, they picked him up and took him to Sachsenhausen, the concentration camp there. Well, again, we were lucky because 4 days later, President Roosevelt pulled back the American ambassador from Berlin and said, with barbarians who do such terrible things to their own citizens, we can't do business. So in order to get on the better side of the Americans, they let go the 50,000 men that they had taken into custody on Kristallnacht. My father included. He came home after 2 more days. My mother had to pick him up because he actually was afraid to come home. Well, I have to tell you something. He shouldn't have been afraid, because while the couple that was living next door, who was Jewish and went to America in 1937, the people who moved in, the man was the head of the SA, which is the SS for local purposes. And he said, I'm going to have a man stand in front of the house, and the 3 Jewish families in this house will not be at all beleaguered. You're not going to let anybody in to do anything bad to them. So these people saved us.
You know, Sam, what I love about always talking to you is no matter what your journeys are, there was always some sort of saving grace. We were lucky.
Right.
We were fortunate. We're talking about 1938, Kristallnacht. Sorry, that's how I've always pronounced it. And
That's
here
right.
you are, saying we were blessed. We were rescued. My
That's
father
right.
spent,
By
he was in a
a
concentration.
high Nazi official.
Yeah.
Now, my father came home and said to my mother, look, I don't care what happens. I know how to go into the main synagogue. And we've got to rescue the choir books, because that is the tradition we need to take to America. Now, remember, he came there and tried to change it all. And now he's going to risk his life and mine, because he wanted to take me, to rescue these books to take to America. Well, my mother said, absolutely not. Actually, he knew a way to get into the synagogue and go upstairs to the choir loft and get the books. Well, here's what happened to the synagogue. It was a very large building in the middle of a block of apartment buildings. Well, they couldn't blow it up or burn it down, because it would have burned down the whole block. So they put an explosive into the ark and blew out all the Torah scrolls. And under the organ, which was hanging down by a cable, we went upstairs. It was just, there was always 100-voice volunteer choir. And they prided themselves in being the best in the world, of course. At any rate, we went upstairs, we found the books, and there was so much dust. And I'm a little kid, I sneezed.
10-year-old boy, 10-year-old boy.
Yeah,
I can picture it.
I sneezed. The whoever was in charge, the captain, said to the troops, go upstairs and shoot at sight. At that moment, talk about luck, the organ fell down. Here I am, because it completely discombobulated them, and we were able to get out.
So somebody, God himself,
Somebody's
might have had a
looking out
plan for
me.
you.
Oh,
Might have
yeah,
had a plan for you.
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, then comes a complicated story, but we did finally, my mother at first didn't get the visa because something got into her eye, because, you know, the trains then were powered by coal, and something got on it. So the American doctor said, you can't go to America, you have a very serious eye disease. Well, after going back, and of course it cleared up, she got the visa for my father. So he went to Holland. And we had to wait a month before we got the visa. And we also then went to Holland to join him.
I have a picture of your father from that point too. I thought, you know, everybody would like to see. So we're sort of helping, you know, trace
All right.
from you. And then there's a picture that I want to show you when you get to America.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm having technical.
Anyway,
yeah, you keep.
I'll keep going.
Let's, one more.
No,
there's your dad.
there he is. There he is.
Yeah.
At any rate, we got to Holland, stayed there for 5 days. Then went to England, where my father had colleagues, and they treated us very well. We got to Southampton, where we took an American boat called the SS Manhattan, which was the largest boat in the American fleet at that time. And it, by the way, became a troop ship during the war and was sunk by a German submarine.
We do have a picture of you on that ship. Yeah, there it is.
This is where we arrived in America, and a little boy looking at the Statue of Liberty with all those refugees. So I was so scared, you can't imagine. At any rate, we got here, and then much luck again. My uncle, or great uncle and great aunt, who had been in America for at least 60 years, picked us up. She was very wealthy. She was American born. And she owned 2 big apartment houses in the Bronx. And she gave us an apartment. But she said to my father, Hugo, look, on Monday, you have to go to the Council of Jewish Women, and they have a place where you can register to get a job, because I can give you an apartment now, but I can't pay for all of your subsistence. So on Monday morning, he was very good about it, went to the Council of Jewish Women, and there was a Rabbi Bernstein who was in charge of getting jobs for cantors, rabbis, teachers, and so on, coming from Germany. Get this about luck. The man came out and said, Cantor, where are you from? He said, I was a chief cantor of the Hauptsynagogue in Mannheim. He said, I like you already because you're the first cantor coming from Germany who wasn't the chief cantor of Berlin.
That's great.
So he said, wait here, and I'm busy. There's somebody in here, and I'll be out in about 10 minutes. And he came out. Now get this. The man with him was the former president of the congregation in Mannheim, where my father was. Well, my father went in, and the rabbi said to him, Cantor, there are two jobs open, one at Temple de Hirsch in Seattle, and one at Temple Emmanuel in Worcester, Massachusetts. And my best friend is the rabbi in Worcester, and I think you should go there. You would get along with him fantastically. So my father came home, and he had Worcester, and he said to my mother, "We're going to Worcester." He said, "I think you've been drinking," she said to him. "That's Worcester, like the sauce I use." Well, we learned it was Worcester.
Massachusetts has very odd spellings. It's not Worcestershire, it's Worcester.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we had to wait a few months, which were quite eventful because my sister and I learned English very quickly. We were in a foreign class where everybody spoke a different language. So in self-defense, you had to speak English. And the teacher only spoke English. And, children within a few days get something of the language, and playing on the streets with all the Italian children that lived around there, you better learn English. And we did. As a matter of fact, I don't know if she still likes it, but my sister spoke English so well with a Bronx accent even. So she became a real native. Yeah. 9 months later, we went to Worcester. We had a strange experience. My parents went there to get an apartment. They got an apartment and came back home, and we got a call from the temple. Now, this was in August. We got to New York in January. And the temple said, you lost your apartment because it's a Swedish area and they do not want Jews to live there. Now, coming from Germany, this was a shock. But in those days, it was pretty provincial, and there was a Swedish area and so on. Well, my father went back. He got another very nice apartment very close to the temple. It was 2 blocks from the temple, and he could walk, and it was wonderful that way. We went to Worcester, and both my sister and I went to classical high school, which was one of the premier high schools in the country. We had a fabulous education. The Worcester system had 6 years of French and 6 years of Latin in those days. Today, of course, I don't want to say what it is. At any rate, it was fabulous education. And I graduated and applied to Boston University, was accepted, and went there in 1945.
Can I ask you a question about that, Sam? When you were going to Boston University, were you going as a composer, a conductor, or a violinist?
I was going as a violinist.
Violinist.
However, Boston was so open to everything. I was a violinist. I played in the orchestra and so on. But I was also going after my father, a little rebellious.
Yes.
And we had a conductor who was a wonderful cellist in the Boston Symphony. But, in those days, this was before hundreds of thousands of GIs came back and were on the GI Bill of Rights and went to school, and it demanded an excellent education. Well, they weren't used to that at BU or most other places. So we had an orchestra, which then was really very good. And Mr. Langendon, that was his name, said, well, we'll play one symphony, the first symphony of Schumann, which is one of my favorites, but to play it for a whole semester and nothing else is pretty poor. So since I was the baby and I was not on the GI Bill, they said, okay, Sam, you want to be a conductor? Let's start our own orchestra. So I started the Intercollegiate Symphony Orchestra of Boston, which had people from New England Conservatory, Harvard, MIT, Tufts, and Boston University.
So that was your rebellious streak there as well.
Right. And we played the first concert of pieces by all Boston composers, Walter Piston, Randall Thompson, the biggies in Boston. Well, after that success, we played another. Lucas Voss was the pianist of the Boston Symphony at that time, and he was very well known already as a composer. And I said, Lucas, why don't you play your first piano concerto with us, and we'll play your first symphony and an all Voss program. Well, the Christian Science Monitor gave us such a review that, we could have gone forever. However, the Dean Kelly at Boston University, called me in and said, Sam, what the heck are you doing? I mean, we have an orchestra here. You are not to do this. Out. He threw me out of school. Well, my friends, the entire orchestra at BU stayed outside when there was a rehearsal. Mr. Langdon said, what's going on? He said, well, if you let Sam back in, we'll play. If you don't, we're not going to play. My friends.
I love that.
So he went to the dean. I was let back in. Same thing with the chorus. We had a chorus master who was a singer who knew two pieces, the Creation and the Messiah. And we did the Messiah for Christmas, the Creation for Easter, boom, boom, like that, every year. Well, the singers came to me and said, Sam, let's start a little chorus. We have 24 kids who want to sing madrigals, want to sing Baroque music and so on and so forth. So we gave a concert which featured the 6 chansons of Hindemith. And everybody said, oh, wow, this is real music and so on. Well, the dean called me in and said, are you at it again? Out. Well, this time, the same thing happened with the chorus. They wouldn't go back. They said, listen, we'd like to do something other than these two works. And it was agreed. I was back in, and I finally graduated in difficulty because the composition teacher didn't want me to go to Harvard because he said, Mr. Piston doesn't know enough counterpoint. You should stay here and learn how to write counterpoint. Well, I did go to Harvard, and he was very, very mad, and he flunked me my last term. And I said, well, he said, okay, this summer you write 6 works in the style of Mendelssohn. Then you can graduate. Well, I did it, and I graduated. And I went to Harvard, and I want to tell you, I realized how little I knew when I got there, because the kids who came in with me, there were 15 composition majors who entered with me at Harvard. I was surprised that I was accepted because these kids knew so much more about music than I ever did, because I sort of had a secondary education, not concentrating on the very fine points, for instance, in theory and so on, and in musicology, because they knew so many things, and I had to catch up, which was a good thing. I mean, it was a great experience. And there I was very lucky again, studying with Walter Piston and also Randall Thompson. And one year, 1949, Paul Hindemith was the guest speaker. He was the Norton lecturer, and he wanted 5 students. Nobody else ever taught while being a Norton lecturer, but he couldn't sit still. So he said, I will teach a course called The Harmony of Theory, the theory of harmony, and the history of theory. Well, that was a 4-hour course on Wednesday afternoons. And I was very lucky again. I was one of the 5 students, and only because from the time I was 12 until I went to college, I studied with Herbert Fromm, who was a wonderful composer, and he was Hindemith's favorite student, both in Germany and in America at Tanglewood. And because Herbert talked to him, Hindemith accepted me as a student, which I am eternally grateful, because this was an experience that I could only have wished for. So I studied with those 3 men at Harvard, and my advisor told me it was Irving Fine, another wonderful composer. By the way, he wrote such terrific choral music that I think maybe Gloria Day can do some of his things. He's a wonderful composer. And Irving said to me after 1 year, he said, you know, Sam, look, you can be a little Paul Hindemith all your life, and because that's what you're doing. You're writing exactly like he, and it's okay. But I think you have more talent. I want you to study with Aaron Copland. I said, well, I'd love to. So he called him, said, Aaron, I have a young man here. I want him to go to Tanglewood next summer and study with you. So Copland said, well, have him send me some things. I sent him 5 pieces because I was writing a piece a day, like Hindemith.
You still are probably doing that, Sam.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I'm sure. Now he's writing only for God.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I sent it to Copland. I got a letter back, which I'm sorry I don't have anymore. But it said, Dear Mr. Adler, thank you very much for sending me your work. I'm not interested in your compositions. I see nothing that would interest me. Can you imagine? Here's America's greatest composer saying, forget it, man. Yeah. Well, Irving called him and said, look, that's why I want him to study with you. He's got to. I said, okay, Irving, for you, I'll take him. But tell him he won't like Tanglewood because I'm going to make it very tough for him. And he did. At the same time, I was doing a lot of conducting. And when I got to Tanglewood, I actually had a chance with the student orchestra, to conduct Appalachian Spring. And Copland, even though he criticized my compositions every time I had a lesson, he loved the way I conducted it. So at the end of 8 weeks, I said, Mr. Copland, can I come back next year and study? He said, you can come back, but come back also as a conductor. You should study with Koussevitzky. You're a much better conductor than a composer. Just forget about composition, become a conductor. I said, no, I want to be whatever, he said. You can come back next year. And I did. And I was partially in his class and partially in Koussevitzky's class. It was a fabulous experience. However, after that year, I graduated from Harvard. And I want to tell you 2 things. One, I got my invitation to be drafted into the United States Army the same day I got my degree. And the Army asked me to be there at Fort Devens on the 5th of December, 1950. Well, I want to tell you this story because it really still makes a big difference to me. I went to see Walter Piston, with whom I had written my dissertation, and he handed it back. It was a concerto for flute, bassoon, and string orchestra. And he made a few funny remarks. And then all of a sudden, he heard about my being drafted, and he was in the First World War. He was in the Navy. And he said, I hear, Adler, you have to go to the Army. Well, I hope it turns out very well. But I want to tell you, I'm worried about myself. And in those days, 1950, every orchestra in America and perhaps throughout the world was playing piston symphonies. Everybody. And those are still one of the finest products of an American composer. And he said, I'm worried about my compositions, that in 25 years, nobody will ever have heard of me. So I said, well, Mr. Piston, you're the most famous composer today. He said, well, thank you. That's true perhaps today. But in 25 years, maybe the only thing people will remember is not my music, but that I wrote a book on orchestration. Well, I wrote a book on orchestration, which is doing very, very well. But perhaps that's going to be true of me in 25 years.
No, I'm not sure about that. I've got, you have to give me 1 minute here, Sam, because I got to brag a little bit on you. You say you have a little book on orchestration. If I understand correctly, it's published in 10 different languages, over 1 million copies sold. Yes. I think Mr. Piston would be very proud of the legacy that you've left. And I think your compositions will go on too. And it's not just this book, but I think you're
Thank you for saying that. And the Piston orchestration book is really very wonderful. And before writing mine, I was going to redo his book because it's really too sophisticated for most students. But we agreed, the same publisher agreed, you should write your own book. And I'm glad I did. At any rate, now, all of a sudden, my sister and I took an apartment and lived together for the few months that I still had before going into the Army. And I was very ecumenical, as I still am. I was conducting a children's choir in a Catholic church, a women's choir in a Protestant church, another women's choir in a Reform synagogue, Temple Israel. And I had a job as music director at Kehilloth Israel in Brookline, which was a conservative congregation. Well, this was nice because I made enough money to live in Boston. And the time came in December when I was drafted. And I want to tell you something. I was so scared. What does the Army mean to somebody who's done nothing but practice the piano and the violin and wrote music and tried to teach music to other people? The Army, I never held a gun in my life, and here I'm supposed to go into the Army. Well, what happened was I was drafted. Too bad, And what happens, and I'm sure it still does, when you go into the Army, in order to get an MOS, that means a placement, you have to pass some tests. Yeah. Well, my job in Boston at Kehilloth Israel, the rabbi, Judah Nadich, was the chief Jewish chaplain in the Second World War. He was in Eisenhower's personal office. And I went to him and I said, Rabbi Nadich, I'm so scared. I don't know what to do. He said, don't worry. You have all these degrees in music. And my best friend is now the chief chaplain at Camp Devens, where you're going to be inducted. And I'm going to call him right now. He called him, said, Joe, his name was Joe O'Malley, Father O'Malley. He said, Joe, I'm sending you a young man and I want you to get him into a band in Washington. He's got these credentials and so on. He went on, he said, Judah, I'll do anything for you. We went through hell in the war, and now I can do that for you. Thanks. Bye. So he said, you see Father O'Malley the minute you have at Devon's, okay? I went to see him. He said, don't you worry. Don't be so worried. I can do this for you. Fine. The tests. First one, vocabulary. Piece of cake. Mathematics could be done by a 3-year-old, and so on. Then comes radio repair. I raised my hand, said, Sergeant, I don't know anything about it. Says, GD, take the exam. So I look, it's a, multiple choice. So I go A to the top. Next one is automobile repair. What do I know? I open the thing, good, fine. Next night, I go see the chaplain. He said, Sam, excuse me, what else do you do besides music? I said, well, I read a lot, and, I love to do all kinds of things. He said, you got the highest score on both radio repair and automobile repair. I can't do a thing for you because we need people like you.
Oh, no.
in the army.
No.
So, couldn't do anything. Paul, again, our lucky star was with me. The next day, we were put on the train going to Texas because 500 men of the 5,000 men that were brought in with me, 500 men were sent to Texas to start the 2nd Armored Division. And they already told us we were going to be sent to Europe, not to Korea, because the Russians and the East Germans were doing all kinds of funny things at the border. So I was so paranoid, though, that on the train, we were 3 high. I was the highest, and the other 2 guys below me, I thought they were conspiring to kill me on the way to Texas.
Gosh.
That's how paranoid I was.
Yeah.
The 2 nice guys, they had no idea. Well, we got there. We got there on the 22nd of December, 1950. Well, I'm going to tell the story that you like. I had to go to sleep at 6 o'clock because we had to be up at 4. So I went to sleep on the 22nd, and all of a sudden, I'm awakened. I thought, oh my God, they're going to take me out and shoot me. So the guy said, put on your Class A uniform. The colonel wants to see you. I said, oh, I didn't do anything. He said, the colonel, I don't know why. So Colonel, Private, he said, I see by your record that you're a composer. I said, yes, sir. He said, well, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow is Christmas Eve. I want you to write a Christmas show for me. I said, well, sir, I'm Jewish. I know a couple of Christmas carols, but I don't know too many. So he asked this guy who took me, he said, Boykin, where are you from? He said, I'm from Utah, sir. Are you a Mormon? I said, yes, sir. He said, do you know a lot of Christmas carols? I said, yes, sir. He said, you teach him to Adler. You keep him awake until he finishes his show. So overnight, I wrote a show. And in the morning of the 24th, the colonel said, anybody who's ever sung in either high school or college, fall out. 400 men of the Utah National Guard fell out. We had the best choir you ever heard. And I rehearsed them all day long. And we had 6 instrumentalists, a clarinet, accordion, and so on. And I wrote for them. And we put on a show a 1.5 hour Christmas show.
So let me review this, Sam, because I think this is just such a great testimony to, yeah, we can do that. The night before, there's no music. You don't even know the songs.
Well,
In
I knew some, I'm
You knew
very,
a couple of them, but you created a
this guy,
show,
yeah.
rehearsed it, and put it on in a 90-minute show.
Wow. Well, in those days, there was no Xerox. You had to, what did you call that? Multiply
I know a mimeograph
uh,
machine or
whatever it was called.
yeah.
Anyway, so all the guys read music. It was just fabulous, you know. So we put on this show. After the show, in which everybody was there, the 400 men and all the officers, and this woman comes up to me and said, Adler, I'm the colonel's wife, and I'm a high church Episcopalian, and I want you this Sunday to start a chapel choir, and I want you to write some music for them every single week so that the 7 o'clock high Episcopal service will be renewed every single Sunday.
Love it. It's like what Bach was doing, You're just carrying on that tradition.
You will never get out of this outfit, because as long as I'm the colonel's wife, I want the very best music in my service. So I started the choir, and we sang all the services, all the Protestant services, all the Catholic services. And actually, when we got to Europe, we found in the 20,000 men in our division, there were 500 Jewish men, and we had no Jewish chaplain. So I was the designated Jewish chaplain also. So we had services every Friday night, and so it was a wonderful relationship. At any rate, we lived through the Texas experience, and on the 8th of July, 1951, in 110-degree heat in Galveston, Texas, we left for Europe.
Yeah.
On the boat, unfortunately, we still had a segregated army. We had a black unit on the board, and the rest all white people from the South. And they were so homesick because most of these kids had never been away from home. So the chaplains took me to their heart and said, listen, Sam, what I want you to do is take the pump organ and play Baptist hymns all day long on board and on deck. So that, and those kids sang and wept at the same time. It was a religious experience I had never had before. It was absolutely fabulous.
That's like your ecumenical outreach, Sam,
Oh,
is
yeah, that was.
you're writing for Baptists, for Episcopalians,
Oh, yeah.
Jewish synagogues with no problem.
No,
No.
it was, I felt like I was really doing something.
Oh yeah.
I was teaching teaching the officers German phrases, because I was the only actual, in my little outfit, I was the only one that was bilingual. So I taught the officers, and they were very bad students. I taught them a few phrases. And the chief chaplain, who was a Presbyterian minister, called me after one session and said, Sam, you're so nervous about going back to Germany.
Yeah.
I want you to remember something. You left as a Jewish refugee. You're going back in a conquering army. And that made me feel a little more steady.
Yeah.
he became partially my boss. I had two jobs: fire direction center chief, that meant telling the artillery exactly where to hit, mostly cows, and um, and a chaplain's assistant, because I could play the organ, even though badly. I could play it a little when we went into the field, and conducted the chapel choir. Well,
I also, Sam, have a few pictures of other things you did while you were in Europe, and I hope you don't mind if I share them. You did this little
well, that
thing
comes
called
later.
the Seventh Harmony.
I'd like you to hold that.
Okay, we'll hold that one off.
Hold
Okay.
on, hold
I don't
on.
want to get ahead.
No, because I want to talk about how that happened. And the
Yes.
whole bridging thing comes in now,
Yeah.
because I never thought about it. We got to Europe and were put into sealed Pullman cars and sent to Y-79, which was a coordinate on the map where our whole division was going to meet. Well, where do you think it was? I could see the house where I was born in
Wow.
Montana.
Wow.
Well, I want to tell you, it was quite an experience.
Wow.
And the chaplains, it was a terrible place to stay, and we were going to be there for 5 days. The chaplains came to me and said, listen, we have a Jeep. We're going to go to Baumholder, which is where we're going to be billeted. The whole division of 20,000 men is going to go there. So we went there, and Baumholder was a little town, 3,600 inhabitants. Poor, you can't imagine. It was really sad. But the billets where we were to stay, the barracks, were gorgeous. They were built by the Germans for the German army. They had a theater seating 2,800 people, the most gorgeous acoustics and everything, because the German army built it for themselves. We took it over. Well, we got there. I got my bunk, and you can imagine 20,000 men coming to a town of 3,600 people. The first weekend was an absolute disaster. They absolutely ruined the town. There wasn't a person that wasn't somehow touched in many ways. We had a brilliant commander. Colonel Lowy was his name. Colonel Lowy called in the chaplains and said, we're going to completely shut off the town until our boys know how to act. We must have the people in the town on our side. If they're against us, we have nothing but enemies. And he was very, very smart that way. Well, he said, look, there are very few of the GIs that speak German, but Adler, who conducts the choir on Sundays, he speaks German. Tell him to get somebody in town to come here, and we'll befriend that person, and maybe he or she can spread some friendship around. Well, I said, well, we have in the company. He said, look, why don't you get somebody to play rehearsals? So I said, I sent two of my boys from the choir to the Catholic and to the Protestant church. Now, I want to tell you, the Protestants and Catholics in that part of town, in that part of the country, in that part of Germany, had no relation one with the other. The priest and the minister lived next door to each other and hadn't spoken ever. So it's still going on, the 30-year war, you know? And so I sent one guy to the Protestant church, which was the large church, and the small Catholic church. But he said, you know, the organist in the Catholic church is really better. Okay. So I went downtown, and it was a lady, a maiden lady. So I went to her house, and of course, they were scared to death. However, when I start speaking German, they know immediately where I'm from. And so he said, so they pulled down the shades and locked the door. And I said, in my best Mannheimer German, look, you don't have to be there. Oh my God, he comes from Mannheim. So they opened the door. And by the way, they had 4 daughters, and I'm still in touch with the youngest daughter. She calls me her big brother. So we're still in touch. And it's really wonderful relations happen.
Yeah.
Well, her oldest sister was the organist at the Catholic Church. She also was the teacher at the Catholic school, since they were segregated schools in every city and every town. So she came. She was scared to come, but she came, and we were very good to her. And after the 3rd rehearsal, she said, Sam, you do such wonderful things with this choir. You know, we had the Germans here, we had the French here, and now the Americans, and all they do is destroy the town. Could you do something for us? I said, well, what can we do? How about, I said, let's organize a town choir. She said, well, that's an idea. I said, well, why don't we get the Catholic choir and the Protestant choir together? She said, oh, no, that never can happen. I said, well, you wait. So I took the chief Catholic chaplain, the chief Protestant chaplain, and we visited the town priest and the town minister. We brought coffee, we brought tea, we brought sugar, we brought all kind chocolate. And for Mrs. Minister, we brought a pair of nylon stockings, which was unheard of. Well, after a very long talk together, we got them to talk together after the 30-year war. And we got them to agree to have the 2 choirs sing together. Well, we had the first rehearsal, and we did Schubert and Schumann and Mendelssohn folk songs. And we had 60 people. The next week, we had 100. And we had to change. The Catholics gave us their very beautiful rehearsal hall. And I said, look, it's close to Christmas. It was October. Why don't we do the Messiah? They don't do the Messiah like we do here in this country. They do all kinds of other things, part of the Christmas oratorio, and so on. So they said, oh, great. So I started doing the Messiah. And the same week that we started working on the Messiah with the choir, I had a letter from the local Palatinate Orchestra asking me to come and guest conduct. This was completely out of the blue. And I said, well, I can't take any money for it, but will you come and be the orchestra for our Messiah? I said, okay, we'll do it. Well, I tell you a story in parenthesis. I went to rehearsal to them, and I said, you know, I actually have a relationship to you, because my first violin teacher in Mannheim, Joseph Levy, was the concertmaster of this orchestra until 1933 and was kicked out because he was Jewish. Actually, he wasn't. He had converted. That didn't matter. Yeah. And of course, there wasn't a dry eye among the older members of the orchestra. And they played out of their minds for me. And they became the orchestra for the Messiah. Well, I want to tell a story before we do the Messiah. Our colonel said, look, in order to get better relations with our neighbors in the towns, we've got to do something. So let's do this. I will send Adler and the 2 chaplains, the main Catholic, main Protestant chaplain, to 20 towns to enlist the children to come to the 20 battalions that we have, and we will play Santa Claus for them. So, okay, we go to the first town, and you have to be careful. If the Catholic Church is on top, you go there because it's a Catholic town, Protestant town, Catholic, and so on. So we get to another town called Hopstetten. Never heard of it. Catholic, big Catholic church. We go there. They close up. Oh my God, what did we do? So I said, don't worry about it. So we went in. The priest was lovely to us. They served wine because this is wine country, and cake and so on. And we discussed and said, okay, we'll send the children. The buses will pick them up. Fine. And he said, tell me, how come you speak German so well? Well, usually I said I was educated at a German university, because if you said to somebody, I was born here, they said, well, I wasn't a Nazi. Well,
Yeah,
I'm
right.
a priest, you know. So I said, well, I was born in Germany. He said, you know, before the war, before the First World War, we had so few Protestants in this town, and we had some Jews, and the next town also had a very small Protestant population. So we put the Jewish children and the Protestant children together in the Protestant school, and had the Jewish teacher from the next town teach. And we became very close friends. We actually were in the First World War together in France. We were wounded on the same day, went into the same hospital. And afterwards, he was here for another year. And then he left for some job. And I never heard from him again. But I just heard that he was killed in Auschwitz.
Oh, gosh.
And I would like to put a memorial into our church because he was such a dear friend and we had such a wonderful relationship. I know his name and when he was born, but I would like to also put the date in which he was killed in Auschwitz. So I said, well, and he said, there is an organization in America that has all the dates, and I can't do anything in English. Maybe you can find out. I said, I'd be glad to. Give me all the data, his name, and when he was born, and so on. So he went into the other room. He came back, and he gave me a slip of paper. It said, Hugo Adler was my father. I mean, the man cried like a baby. I said, no, I'm happy to tell you, my father is very much alive. And they corresponded for several years after that. But imagine, we get to this little town. Well, it was unbelievable.
It's the divine providence again, Sam.
Yeah, the whole thing.
I know. I have to tell you, we're probably running out of time.
Oh.
I'm so sorry. We've gone an hour. We're over an hour. I have a couple things I do want you to share about. Well, there's so many things. I
Let me
want to
just
talk.
tell you that
Yeah.
the result of all these concerts in Baumholder was that I was able to convince the army that the only way we can build bridges was with music and with their music. And that if I get the chance to build an army orchestra, I could really make a difference and we could make a difference. And they actually agreed. And that was the beginning of the 7th Army Symphony Orchestra.
I love that. I love that. Now we're going to put up that picture right now so you can
Sorry,
see
I
that.
talked so long.
No, it's wonderful. There's so much. We've got, look at the energy. I love that. Here
Could
you
have
are.
another talk.
We have to do one more. I want to show a picture of you with Aaron Copeland.
Those are my boys.
And I want to see the picture of you and Aaron Copeland at the Eastman School, which I just think is such a wonderful. Look at that.
Yeah.
Isn't that fabulous? 1976, the bicentennial of our country. But before we go, I want to ask you, just share with us how you how you got to know Arts Empowering Life and Gloria Day Cantores and our directors, Elizabeth Patterson and Richard Pugsley.
Many years ago, Gloria Day Cantores gave some prizes to Dan Pinkham, Robert Starr, and myself for composing sacred music.
Yeah,
And there they are.
there they are.
And I went to Orleans, as you see, and we established a wonderful relationship. And ever since then, I have written pieces for the choir, and both Elizabeth and her son, Rick Pugsley, have done such great job. You also even singing in it sometimes when you're not playing the trumpet. They have done such a great job. And the latest album is so fabulous, called Speaking to Our Time. It won the first prize, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I'm so grateful. Like I say, we only got to 1950. We have we have another 50 years, so we're gonna have to make like a podcast series to do this. I'm so grateful that it's probably been 27 years of relationship, and I've been privileged to have been involved in many of those musical things. You wrote a mass for the dedication of the Church of the Transfiguration,
And by the way, you went to Eastman to get a doctorate meanwhile.
I did, and we walked by the little Sam Adler bust every day in the Kaminsky Hall. So,
I'm
and no,
the only faculty member that was busted.
you've been.
Everybody else has a picture. I
Well,
have.
they tried to throw you out of Boston University, but Eastman, they had to weight you down, so it's impossible to throw you out of Eastman.
That's right.
No, I've had wonderful experiences with you, here, and I'm grateful that you've in this new performing arts center that you've seen it.
Yeah.
We have camps throughout the summertime with kids, and they have lockers.
My
And
wife Emily and I were there and had a beautiful experience.
Yeah, we have lockers with famous composers, Bach and Mozart and Adler. So, kids can remember where they put their lockers. But anyways, thank you so much, Sam. This has been a pleasure.
Because it's not, we don't have time for questions.
I think we probably have to. Only one question that I think someone said was, it's probably impossible for you to say, what would be your favorite composition?
Oh, that's very difficult.
So
Asking me which is my favorite daughter.
Exactly. That's impossible one for me to answer as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're both blessed with beautiful daughters, so grateful for that. I want to thank you. I want to tell everybody listening in to please next month we have Susan Rogers. She's a multi-platinum earning sound engineer. She did now something very different, Sam. She did engineer Prince's hit album Purple Rain. And she's also gonna talk. She's studied experimental psychology. The topic that she's going to talk about is what the music you listen to says about you. She's done lots of neurological studies, and I just think it's going to be a fascinating, how the music you listen to defines you, what it says about you. That's going to be Saturday, February 10th.
Dangerous subject.
It is. It is. She's from Boston. She was a Berkeley professor, just retired. But she'll be out here on Cape Cod at 3:30 on February 10th, but it will also be live streamed, so you can listen from Perrysburg, Ohio as well.
Good.
And I imagine lots of your friends from all over the world are listening today, and we'll make this this talk available so you can share it and people can listen.
I want to thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to work with you.
Yeah. God bless you, Sam. We will stay in touch. We'll do one more. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.